Many a child growing up in the 1970s or 1980s who was of Irish extraction, or for that matter, or of British or English extraction, my father was very fond of Western movies. And I suppose you could say, in a way, they were the superheroes of their day. And certainly, if you look at comics, they actually replaced superheroes as the main selling titles in the 1950s after superheroes died a death in the late 1940s and became passe. Now, there's one name that stands out in the history of Western writing, and it's this gentleman, Louis L'Amour. Now, he wrote at what might be considered breakneck speed and sold something over 320 million copies of his work. But I still think he actually writes quite well. He has quite an interesting style. And as a kid, I used to nick my dad's books or my uncle's books to read them because he has a particular family saga, the Sacket saga, where I nicked it. Now, they never had all the books, and Moore, unfortunately, except for older gentlemen or older people, has become, I would say, a writer who doesn't sell in the same way as he might once have done. But Amazon had a deal on his books to buy as a set for Kindle, and I thought we'd have a look at some of them and have a look at how he writes. Now, I'm not going to do a biography of him, although I will include one from Wikipedia because I strongly believe a writer's work should speak for itself. But what I will do is read out some of his work, and this is the preface from one of his books. I'm just going to stop and make sure it's showing and put it back to non-share and then share and bring it back up. And here we have his work. This is the Kindle version of the Sackets, where basically these were written in a bit of a piecemeal way. Louis Moore didn't plan out his works in the same sort of precise way as someone like Tolkien, where everything interlaces into leaves. Well, you couldn't when you're writing 100 novels. Having said that, they generally do work reasonably well together. There are some inconsistencies, but Tolkien has some inconsistencies, even considering his extreme attempts at avoiding them. This is the preface from the collected edition, where all of it had been said the children of immigrants and foreigners, even the American Indian, although he arrived here a little earlier. What a man is and what he becomes is in part due to his heritage, and the men and women who became West did not emerge suddenly from limbo. That's a continuing theme in his work, and the first of the Sackett novels starts in England in the year 1599, before the main character, the protagonist, wanders over to America eventually. And I'm going to read a small amount of it out, just to illustrate the style of him as an author and how he manages to grab your attention. I won't read out the whole preface, it goes on for several pages. Now, here we go. Chapter 1. It was my own devil's own temper that brought me to grief, my temper and a skill with weapons born of my father's teaching. In 3 lines, the writer has managed to tell you a great deal about his character. He's managed to tell you the character is hot-tempered, that hot temper also creates a problem for the character. He's also managed to tell you he has a skill with weapons, and that skill was passed down by his father. So he can make a guess that perhaps his father is a soldier or in the military, or perhaps something more edging towards the outside the law. Yet without that skill, I might have emptied my life's blood upon the cobbled stones of Stamford. Emptied my body of blood, and for what? Again, in 3 lines, he set up a place. He set up a sort of situation where we wonder why this is going to happen. Until that moment in Stamford, it would have been said that no steadier lad lived in all the fenlands than Barnet the Sackett. Even the use of fenlands is interesting because it's generally a more archaic term. No one who brought better from his fields than I, or did better at the. Hang on, just because I've got the share button at the friends that were my home. Then a wayward glance from a lass, a moment of red bursting fury from a stranger, a blow given and a blow returned. He likes to counterpose statements quite a lot, does Louis Moore. You will often find these counterposed statements as clauses presented against each other. and that all of might have been my life vanished like a fog upon the fens beneath a summer sun. In that year of 1599, a man of my station did not strike a man of noble birth and expect to live. Again, he's told you the character is not a nobleman. He's at best at the upper end of the peasantry, a yeoman. Or if he lived to keep the hand that struck the blow, trouble came quickly upon me, suddenly and without warning. These clipped, precise statements fulfill one of the chief goals of writing. He tells you things in a minimal way, and he doesn't waffle at you. You can write in a very verbose way. Tolkien, who I keep comparing him to, is probably infamous as one of the most verbose writers ever, and sometimes get critiques on it. But Tolkien was trying to achieve a different style and tried to write an epic. And perhaps Llewellyn Moore is trying to write an epic of the Old West. Sometimes it has been said that his work is that epic of the Old West. Certainly the Sacket Saga could perhaps claim to be that. It began that day near Reach when I slipped a pearl upon the Devil's Dyke. The dyke is a great rampart of earth some 6 miles long and built in the long ago by people who might have been my ancestors. These were the Iceni, I have been told, who lived in my country long before the Romans came to Britain. Now, he's situated in a particular place again. We know that Llewellyn Moore, and the reader would have known as well, that his work is generally situated within old west of America, or situated in that world. So for him to be writing in Britain is quite odd for the reader. This was released in 1974 and served as a kind of prequel to the Sacket Saga. When I slipped, I caught myself upon my outstretched palms to keep the mud from my clothing, and I found myself staring at the muddy edge of what appeared to be a gold coin. Now, coins of any kind were uncommon amongst us, which is true, of course, of the period. Most of the peasantry or the working classes, of what we could call the pre-working class, I suppose, or the rustics or the rural people, tended to use barter. Barter was even quite common in much of Britain and Ireland. For a long time after this, merchants saw coins, but not many. Yet here it was, a gold coin. Now, Llewellyn Moore is often characterized as a kind of follow-on from pulp writers. I think that's true, and I think it's also untrue. Not all the pulp writers were awful. There's an awful lot of rubbish from them as well, that must be said. I'm not one of those people who wants to romanticize them and say that they were all great writers. They were. Not every one of them had a great style. Not everyone was someone like C.L. Moore or Robert E. Howard at his best, or H.P. Lovecraft. And even H.P. Lovecraft can be ponderous to read at times. Llewellyn Moore is an easy read, but he's an easy read because he writes in a precise and orderly style, and he develops his characters, and they're organized. And you can tell a good deal of historical research has gone into his work, more than is sometimes apparent on the surface of it. Rereading him as an adult, I can see how he builds his characters, and he builds them and deals with numerous plot threads and interlaces them together. He doesn't do what is I would say, the hallmark of a bad writer in some ways, where the plot development is like paragraph 1, I'll tell you this bloke is wearing a shirt. Paragraph 2, I'll tell you this bloke likes a drink. Paragraph 3, I'll tell you this bloke is chubby, etc. He builds it together and works it together as though you were adding ingredients to a loaf of bread or chucking them into a meal. And that's the mark of a really skilled writer. Of course, by the time you've written 100 books, you'd want to be really skilled. Now, I'm going to actually recommend him as a writer. I know not everyone out there is a fan of Western novels, but he's a really, really good writer. And his books are fun to read, light to read, and sometimes they deal with more serious topics like bigotry or prejudice or relationships between the Native Americans and incomers, or stuff like railway barons and stuff like land being sold on and how people dealt with that. He's not always that light. And he's a writer who went on for a very long time. Much of his work has been adapted to movies, but I'd say they are of variable quality. And the Sacket Saga would certainly work if someone was willing to stump up the coin as a long-running Netflix or Amazon show